Real-time Sovryn is go.
Woo, the man of tomorrow, Sabzu, the rated R radio star, here with you, coming from the BDSM Studio 5. And, I have something I want to talk about for a few minutes anyway, that is a bit of well, I'll say a small realization I've had. In, I've been thinking a lot lately about the origins of Silicon Valley itself. And while, I famously said over the past few years on Sovereign Tech that, like, look, when we're talking about the tech giants, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Apple, all of them, they're very different companies today than they were, when they started. And this is also true for Facebook slash Meta. And they're going to be a major focus of this conversation as well. That they operate under different rules. And the reality is, though, there's a pun in that, the reality is Silicon Valley itself operates in a very different way than it originally did. And so I think it would be helpful to maybe start, just for a moment, to talk about how did Silicon Valley even become a thing and what is going on right now. Because what I think is happening right now, aside from a bubble that is likely going to pop here very soon, because, well, the AI boom appears to be not as long lasting as the blockchain boom was, which staved off a bubble from popping in Silicon Valley, about 10 years ago. And the AI boom is it's too expensive. It's so much more expensive than blockchain ever was. Like, it's something that just cannot be sustained, even though we're talking about, companies that really, have valuations in the trillions of dollars. But of course, there's inflation, among other things. I mean, this stuff is still, wildly expensive to operate, which I think is part of the reason for, the sudden big push to do, not LLMs, but SLMs, right? Small language models that can run locally on machines, whether it's, a smartphone, as we've seen with the Pixel 9 in particular. I mean, yes, iPhones have had, NPUs, neural processors, for a very long time. Granted, so have Android phones. That's not necessarily new, but developing to where these things are being handled locally more and more and more, is really, like, it's apparent. We can see the trend happening in very real time. And it's clearly happening because it just has to, and in one sense, of course, I don't want to get lost on a side subject with that, but on one sense, I'm very glad about this because it also keeps everything from going to the cloud, because it just can't go to the cloud. Like, the cloud cannot handle this load. And granted, that's a huge conversation to get into as well, but not necessarily part of the purview here. But the AI boom is ending, and there might be some companies that fall away in its wake. And let's be clear here. Like, AI itself, and I think the reason that it's ending is because AI itself is not a product. Okay, it's just infrastructure. It's something you tack on to products that exist, that Silicon Valley has already created, really. And, I could get into particulars. Of course, I'm talking about more generative AI, narrow AI. We're not talking about the big stuff that doesn't even exist, right? Like artificial general intelligence and so on. And it doesn't. But regardless, okay, this is what, the reality's hitting hard in Silicon Valley right now. And I think it's more than that, though. It's more than just the AI boom kind of coming to an end. Of course, we have plenty of research to show now that, in fact, consumers, not just consumers, but also the enterprise space, they won't buy something, or they're less likely, I should say, to buy something if AI is, part of the selling points, if it's part of the pitch deck, or if it's in the name or whatever. Like that is happening. Okay. Now, you go on social media, I don't think you'd necessarily get that. I don't think you'd really realize that. If you go on social media, everybody's like, AI is going to do this, AI is going to do that, blah, 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 blah. It is really, I made the sound of vomit. It is all vomit. It's word vomit. because it's horseshit. It's not going to do anything that they're claiming. It's always future promises, right? Unless you're Google and you're just like, oh yeah, we've got all the data in the world and we're going to bake it all into Gemini and, woohoo, here we go. It's the Wild West out there. Give everybody a gun, start shooting. I mean, that's what it feels like. They're the only ones that really have the data set, in my opinion. I mean, including with YouTube. They're the only one between them and X. They're the only, and Reddit, of course, also has an exclusivity deal with Google. So, who has an actual like creative data set or a rich data set that could even make AI something worthwhile? Strangely enough, it very much comes down to Google and Elon Musk as having those. Okay. So anyway, we got a lot of side subjects here, but so if you're on social media, you still think that like AI was the thing, but in the real world, you find out no, it's not. Just like when Procter and Gamble, many years ago, did their own independent research on Facebook/Meta's, metrics, their claims of ROI and ad reach, and found out that Facebook ads that, basically that Facebook was lying outright in their ability to achieve ROI and their overall metrics. So they called bullshit on, that entire thing. And, there's nuance in all of this, right? Because you can think of some small companies who do Facebook ads or use Facebook Marketplace or something like that. And they actually like, they do get ROI. They do get return on investment. They do, well for them. But that's for smaller companies. When it gets into the bigger stuff, no, you might as well be advertising on TV at that point. Anyway, tons of side subjects here. What's happening, in my opinion, some people have called this a techlash. I think it's actually more than that. The techlash is not accurate. It's not that people are turning away from technology itself, because they're not. What's actually happening is an unreality backlash. And that's what I want to talk about. So I want to start this off with a conversation around how Silicon Valley itself even started. Okay. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because it's actually not a super long story. Okay. But it started really with, and I don't think this is unfair to say, it really started with a company that's still around today and still doing money. That being Hewlett-Packard. Okay, HP, as many people know it as. And HP, started by Bill Hewlett and, David Packard. I want to say in the late 30s, actually, they started that. Their, first mission, we're talking about at a time when it was a company of like maybe 200 employees or something. Their first mission was actually creating scientific tools, tools that measured reality, right? Like the HP 200A, that was it was a precision audio oscillator. They did end up working with the military throughout World War II, of course. Silicon Valley and the military working together is a long-standing friendship for sure. But they really, it all started with just making, scientific tools that helped with collecting data, maybe organizing that data, measuring, all of this stuff. It was very much about dealing with, this is the key point, Silicon Valley's start was basically about measuring and interacting with reality. And I think that was true for most of Silicon Valley's history, for about, 40, 50 years, getting into the early aughts maybe. Now, the problem with only dealing with reality, the external reality, not the inner universe in each of us, but the outer universe, okay, is it's limited. Like you can only scale so much. You can only do so much. What ends up happening, in starting in the 90s, and granted, we don't need to go into the history of ARPANET and all that, crap, okay, but what ends up happening starting in the 90s and really coming to fore in the mid-aughts, and then even more so when the iPhone becomes a thing and the smartphone becomes a thing, in 2010 and beyond, okay, when it really came into its own and like everybody started having one. What really, what ended up happening basically the internet became an alternate reality. Okay. And, you could call it the cyberspace, whatever you want to call it. But what Silicon Valley began to realize is this cyberspace was not limited, or at least it was far less limited than the actual meat space. And so Silicon Valley starts to do this turn about 15 years ago, maybe a little earlier, and maybe we'll say 20 to be safe. About 20 years ago, it starts to do this turn where development, software, apps, everything that they're about and how their devices interact and how you use their devices all end up focusing not so much on meat space, not so much on reality, but instead on unreality. In fact, I call this the unreality inverse problem, okay? Or you could call it the reality or the inverse reality problem, might be a better way to go for it. So the inverse reality problem is in the sense that Silicon Valley, again, looked to engage in infinite scale. Okay, now we could get into, the dot-com boom and everything, which is, really just a history lesson of where a lot of this, trying to invest in cyberspace and trying to make money off of cyberspace, is really like the very early signals that this does not work on a long enough timeline. At the time, the world wasn't ready for it, so it popped quickly. But I think similar pops of a bubble, like we already just talked about, are really on their way. But this inverse reality problem, their focus, and you think particularly of, say, Meta, with the Oculus Quest and everything else, and their big push into the metaverse, that failed. That really failed. The only thing that's still giving it any kind of credibility and that's making it chug along is because Apple threw their hat into the ring. But ultimately, the Vision Pro from Apple is also not a success. And it's having a very hard time, finding its use case. It really is. I'm not saying it's not you can't find useful reasons for it. I'm not saying there isn't cool things you can do with it. Okay, but something with that level of horsepower. All right, and yeah. Oh, they're going to come out with a cheaper one and blah blah blah, and it's like, okay, yeah, everything's 5 years from now, right? Everything. That's one of the biggest problems. Another huge problem with Silicon Valley, not just their focus on unreality. Okay, and I said unreality, not just their focus on unreality, but this constant moving the goalposts. Oh yeah, self-driving cars in 5 years. Oh yeah, Mars in 5 years. Oh yeah, we'll do this in 5 years. We'll do this in 5 years. It's always in fucking 5 years, and it never happens. Sure, is Apple going to figure out a way to come out with a cheaper, Vision Pro headset that does a little bit less or has missing a couple features here and there? Yeah, of course they're going to be able to. Are they going to keep trying at this for the next 10 years? Yeah, why not? They've got the money. They really can, do that. But I don't see the conversations of, holy shit, I have to have this thing. As to where a lot of other things that Apple comes out with that are equally useless, or aren't ready for prime time yet, I guess we could say. I do hear people clamor for those, like the Apple Watch. There's no call for that damn thing, and it doesn't live up to the hype either. I've used it. I used the Apple Watch Ultra 2. I used one for quite a while. This is, a device that costs a ridiculous amount of money for one, but for two, I had it set up with, cellular connection and everything. And I'll be damned if I could get it to download a fucking podcast. I'll be damned if I could get it to, consistently stream music. The value prop for me with one of those is to not have to use the phone at all. And it couldn't deliver on that. And believe me, I tried it in cities too. It's not just because I live out in West Bumfuck. Okay. But people still want these damn things, and so much, and I get it, around the world, Apple is, it's a status symbol that you have. And I understand. Okay. But even all of those people who think that that's such a status symbol and I know some of them, and they are not clamoring to get a Vision Pro. They're in no hurry, and it's not because of the price. They can afford it easy. It has nothing to do with that. It's just they just don't see it. And I think in general, it's a story. It's a cautionary tale of what's happening to Silicon Valley in general. Silicon Valley versus the world. The world is saying, no, we want to get back to reality, but Silicon Valley can only grow. It can't grow anymore in reality. Even Microsoft is like, they canceled their whole project of putting servers into the ocean. And they're like, no, this isn't going to work. Like they're literally running out of land, to be able to pull this off. Maybe that's why there's a big push, or part of why, there's a big push to get everybody into cities, even though everybody's running out of the cities now as well, because everybody wants to go out and fucking touch grass. Everybody wants to go out. They want to actually meet people. Don't believe me? Interesting research. I may link to it in the show notes. You'll see it, either on the YouTube video, or you'll see it, if you're just listening to the audio version of this on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, wherever you happen to listen to it. Okay. Interesting research has come out that the amount of money, and this isn't based upon inflation, but the ticket sales and the amount of money being made on live music shows, real live music shows, is almost triple what it was in 2019. We're not comparing it to 2020, 2021 numbers. We know the score there. No. In 2023 and going into 2024, I mean, it's almost into the double-digit billions of money being spent for people to go and see live music. And I think, with music being, as Pythagoras would say, right? Music is music is math. Music is, at the very heart of the universe and so on. And I think music in a very real way is at the very heart of us, at the heart of the human condition. That's why we've always had it since the beginning of us coming together in any meaningful way. Music, I think, is a bellwether. And we're really seeing, like, there isn't a dramatic interest in AI generated music, but more importantly, this live music metric, I think, is absolutely fascinating and tells an incredible story. That people have had enough of unreality. They want to be around other people. They want to see real people performing real music. Now, I'm not going to get lost in the conversation that, well, most pop acts and even rock and metal acts and whatever, like, they're using backing tracks. How much of it is actually real? Everybody's lip syncing and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I mean, that's happening to a very high degree. It's not true for everyone. There are plenty of people out there who play absolutely live, real rock music, and it's fucking amazing. And I've been there. Mrs. Sovryn and I have gone to see many of them. Okay. But I think people are there is this dramatic pushback against the unreal. And is it generative AI that might have even, was the straw that broke the camel's back on this? Maybe, because people you instantly know most of the time when something was generated by AI. Okay. Most of the time. And I think maybe people have just seen that so much, and they're just like, it just makes them want to, blow chunks, just makes them want to hurl. It's like eating too much of a decent food. It's like, okay, yeah, this is a great staple, but I'm done. I need something else. And now they're looking for the great food, which can only come from reality. If you take my analogy. So I think there's a dramatic pushback going on. It's an inverse reality problem. In that the less you pay attention to reality, and it appears that, so this is the problem. You stop paying attention to reality. You stop engaging with reality. You keep trying to create an unreality like cyberspace, something along those lines. Okay. And the more you get away from reality, your profits and growth look like they're going up, but actually you're creating the exact opposite problem, where people are just naturally resisting what you're offering, no matter, what you're doing. So again, it's the inverse reality problem. I'm ultimately, I hate the word hope, but I'm ultimately very hopeful about this. I'm glad. I'm glad that people are wanting to get out there, and see real music. I mean, and that's just one metric, but there's plenty others. Okay. Just like we're seeing, with streaming services and so many other things, people are wanting live content. They want to be able to engage. They want to be able to interact with others at the same time. They don't want stuff canned. They don't, I mean, we've been fed this narrative that people want things in their time, right? Meaning, yeah, I'll download it when I'm ready. I'll listen to it when I'm ready. I'll watch it when I've got time and all this. We're actually really, we're discovering, no, people want appointments to be around other people, whether it's going to a concert, whether it's watching a football game, whether it's whatever. And the harder, and it's so funny to me, it's mind-boggling that like the Olympics and so many live sports and live events are so popular because they're the thing that only the human can do. And so I do think it points at a much broader desire by human beings. Like, no, this is what we want. We don't want fake shit. We don't want unreality. We want reality. We want to engage with reality. We want to share real experiences with each other. And that's what's happening right now. And so Silicon Valley's in trouble because their business model from the past 20 years has been in dealing in unreality. It's been in creating things that feed cyberspace instead of the real world. It's been about pillaging the real world to help generate and support, this bullshit world that exists online. But it would appear that time is coming to an end. At least for many. At least for those with perhaps some degree of means. Now what is Gen Z and whatever's coming after Gen Z, what are they going through? There's the concept, I think Taylor Lorenz calls it like extremely online, right? Maybe perpetually online is a better idea. I think even from younger people, like there's research to back this up, that there's dramatic pushback against that. Like, no, I want to be around people. I need people. Does part of this also come out of 2020? Absolutely. Absolutely. That was a test run, to see, like, wait, can people actually, exist in their, can they be in their little siloed existences and not go crazy? No, they go crazy. And they won't put up with that. So ultimately, I see it as a good thing. And if Silicon Valley crashes, I mean, does that mean Apple's going to go out of business? Fuck no. They're making trillions. Nvidia's not going to go out of business. Microsoft's not going to go out of business. I think there's a lot of companies that could fall away, that could end up getting, acquired, consumed, whatever by the larger companies that still have like actual, cash flow and, cash on hand. But I see that as, and, and I don't like people losing their jobs. I mean, I feel that. But at the same time, we have to get back to reality. I mean, so much I think of inflation and like the valuations and costs of things, so much of that is based algorithmically off of comparative value based on the unreality of cyberspace. And so while I don't think the internet is going away, as much as maybe it should, while I don't think the internet's going away, the focus on the unreal is going to fall apart, and you're going to be left with something that I think looks very different. I don't think we're going into the metaverse. I don't think people are going, like, it's not going to happen. I mean, you already have creators, creators are figuring it out. They're figuring it out that this is expensive. To be on these platforms, like, I am losing so much money in the sense that, Apple has to take their 30% cut. Then Patreon has to take, whatever their percentage is, or pick the platform. Like, or how about OF? I'll just say OF. OF takes what, 40% or something, some crazy number that they take on everything that you make. None of this can really sustain itself. It just can't. And ultimately, again, I'm hopeful and I'm glad that there is this massive pushback and that we're seeing, where people really want to put their money. And it seems like they want to put their money in reality, not in unreality. It's going to be a hard lesson for a lot of companies, but I'm looking forward to them learning it. That's it for this real-time Sovryn. You have thoughts on this? I'd love to hear it. And I'm going to do real-time Sovryn's where I, respond to your thoughts. Okay. Get that salient stuff out there. Okay. You can drop it in YouTube. You can drop it on Spotify, has a comment section, wherever you can, or you can email me at fu@nwo.red. That just stands for follow up. So fu@nwo.red, and you can give me your thoughts. And who knows, I might end up covering it on a future episode. I'll see all of you on the other side.